Hi there, Jay McBain here from Canalys Research. I'm a chief analyst on partnerships, on ecosystems, on channels, on alliances, not on cars. But I do want to talk about the auto industry today, and I want to talk about an industry that over the next 10 or 20 years is going to be massively transformed by partnerships. This decade of the ecosystem is obviously affecting all 27 industries. And sometimes it's interesting to talk about an industry that a lot of us have as a hobby. We mostly all drive cars and own cars and have bought in cars. For most families around the world, it'll be the second most expensive thing you ever buy. And a lot of psychology and a lot of emotions wrap around cars as well. So telling this story, telling it from the top down, last year's economy, $104 trillion in size. The auto industry makes up about 3% of it. It's the ninth largest industry in the world. And you'd think of the second most expensive thing you're buying, it's not the second biggest industry, but it happens to be one out in front of us. We're driving by car dealerships every day. We're hearing from people and looking at technology and everything, one of those areas where we may spend an hour, 2 hours a day in a car. So it's a big interface to a daily part of our lives. So where we begin in partnerships, one is at the dealer level. And looking back at car dealerships and the relationships they have with local entrepreneurs, which in most cases car dealerships are third-party run, third-party owned, started back in 1889. And this idea of dealerships being the front end window to the customer experience of buying your car, of servicing your car. You wouldn't pick up the phone and call Mercedes or General Motors. You would obviously work with your local car dealer. And over the years, and in this case over a century, these families that own these car dealerships and multi-generational families got quite powerful, got quite rich, and in many cases they run the Chamber of Commerce. They're responsible for putting Congress people and senators and others into power around the world. And they do hold a lot of sway as these hyper-local businesses. So telling a story in the US about Ford, who the CEO has been one of the most vocal about the industry and the future of the industry. And so if you kind of capture the speaking and on TV and in keynotes and things, looking at this changing go-to-market. Obviously, electric cars are changing the very industry, but not just from a technology, not just from a product perspective, but a go-to-market, from a routes-to-market perspective, from a pricing perspective, from a packaging perspective, from a marketing perspective. So many things are changing. But in electric cars, for example, it's based on an ordering strategy, a build-to-order. And you don't have these car dealerships full of cars and working through inventory in the old sense. And where car dealerships sit on very expensive property, usually on Main Street in town, which are mostly filled up with cars that obviously carries a large capital and burden cost with it. And the North Star for the industry, the most valuable company, Tesla, which at one time was as valuable by a market cap as every other car company combined, and becoming the first $1 trillion car company, is presenting this North Star of what electric car sales, what electric cars look like from a go-to-market. And they're more profitable per car. In many cases, it's legislated because of the lobby power of the car dealerships that each state, province around the world had to sell cars, new cars, through dealerships. And that's starting to loosen places like the US. Many states don't require that anymore. It forced Tesla, for example, to open up these little retail locations, which they, in air quotes, called dealerships. But in the States now that they don't have to do that, they've pretty much shut them down. And it's a direct order type of business. So again, out in public, talking about ordering cars, like a Ford F-150 Lightning truck or a Ford Mustang car in your bunny slippers is pretty challenging to an industry for 140 or so years has been working through one linear supply chain. And obviously this creates a lot of concern. So Ford went ahead and separated its electric vehicle and legacy businesses. And with the CEO out talking out loud about these new models, people are freaking out a little bit about how this is all going to play out. So dealerships is one element, but that's not a transformation of an entire industry. That's just a changing route to market, go to market, where the value is going to be. So the second part of that's happening in partnerships is platforms. So unless you've been living under a rock, there is a lot of movement towards this electric cars. So China has been the most aggressive by 2030, wanted to sell at least 40% of cars by then. In the last couple of weeks, the US has upped its targets to 2032. And the EU has been very, very aggressive on changing and actually putting an end to gas-fueled cars by 2035. So we're now in the last 10 to 12 years of this old model. And as these cars change, one interesting thing is changing at the same time. So I had sold PCs for 17 years, and I was never confused. The 11 components that go into a PC come from third parties, and they're pretty much bolted together and wrapped in plastic or metal with your logo on it and warranted. You then take it to market and service and support the customer and everything else. But the actual technology, there was not very much differentiation underneath the plastic. And so what happens in cars, which, again, for the longest time with internal combustible engines, this idea of a Corvette versus a Camaro, a Mercedes versus a BMW, and obviously a Ferrari versus a Lamborghini, the soul of a car has been in its engine. And the sounds it makes, the feeling you get, the experience of driving is now moving to a golf cart, where an electric car will be faster than any of those and quieter and producing almost no sound and producing no emissions. But they also start to look like a PC. Everything below the driver is starting to become a platform. And that platform, based on the width of the wheels and the height and a number of different dimensions, will service every kind of car. And there's 365 kinds of car today. And just based on wheelbase and based on a number of things, whether it's a pickup truck or whether it's a small sedan, it will all be based on these central platforms. And underneath that, you have 14 car companies driving these platforms. It combines for 54 kinds of cars, and again, 365 sub-brands of cars. But you start to see their dedicated EV platforms that they're building, and what's going to win out in terms of battery technology, in terms of the motor and everything else, could be something that is completely third party and even not engineered or developed, or the IP isn't owned by the actual car manufacturer that you're buying from. This third part of partnering now, so you talk about the underneath the driver, let's talk about out front of the driver. Every pixel in front of the driver is now up in the air in terms of how it's going to work. So, for years, you'd trust your auto manufacturer would make the speedometer and the climate control and the radio, and most people would complain how these things work, and they were a little bit backwards from maybe the iPhone or the Android that has a better, more fluid, more frictionless user experience. Well, the introduction of CarPlay and Android Auto was a major turning point for this industry, and it might be one of the triggers that changes the industry as we know it. So right now, Apple last summer said that 79% of people won't buy a new car unless it has Apple CarPlay. So they're now an integration first buyer. More so than cost, more so than service or support or some of the legacy things you think about in cars. It has to, when I sit down, become part of my environment. I have to get my notifications, I have to get my calendar, I have to get my reminders, I have to get my text messages, it has to be immersed in my digital life. And by the way, CarPlay version 1 was that little iPad or little tablet on the middle of the dashboard. CarPlay version 2, what you see here, goes from window to window to windshield. Take away the plastic and leather, everything becomes a pixel. And Apple now owns, or Google now owns your speedometer. They own your gas gauge, whatever, electric or gas. They own your climate control. Obviously, they own your AV, audio, video, and radio, and everything else. So all the pixels, not only in front of the driver and passenger, but obviously on the back seats as well, every pixel in the car is run by a tech company. And so this starts to get interesting And by the way, 79% was kind of a shocking number when Apple mentioned it. We've done research since then, asking, people around the world, and shockingly enough, the numbers are actually higher than that. So if you look at how often people use it, literally all the time or most of the time, it makes up almost the entire pie chart. But the secondary question is, now you're going out for a new car, and if you add up, very important and important, you get to 91% of people literally want Apple CarPlay, or in the case over there, it's 37 plus 50, 87% of people want Google Android. So you can start to think about the majority car buyer, which in a few years will be a millennial, all digital, all the time, very much wanting everything in their experience to be run by a tech company, not a car company. So if you think about a car company for a second, a couple of weeks ago, General Motors made a pretty shocking claim that they're going to take away CarPlay and Android Auto and build their own. And this could be, if they don't change course, which I'm sure they're going to, but if they don't change course, this will be a going out of business strategy. You can't have 91% of people, and growing from that 79 last summer, wanting a certain experience. And there's no way that GM is going to be able to compete for the resources, compete for the people and the programmers and the talent. It goes back to the old story in PCs where, regardless in the 80s or 90s, if you were a programmer, you had to build for Windows first. Whether you wanted to or not, you had to build for the bigger market first. Then you might build for Mac, and then if you had time left over, you might build for Linux. But by that time, you'd be back to, square one, adding more features onto your primary user, which is Windows. That got all the gravity, that got all the attention. Same thing in the smartphones today. People build iPhone first, not because the market share is there, but because the money and the monetization sits behind that platform today. 80% of it sits there. And then secondly, you build Android. Do you think there's any time left over where your best engineers and programmers are going to go build for a proprietary General Motors system with 60 other car companies? No, there's no chance. And so all the apps you love today, all the innovation in the ecosystem is going to go to the gravity of where the user is and the ability to make money. And if you can issue your technology to that 1 or 2 hours that your customer's in the car, not in front of their brick, which is their phone or a computer, you're going to jump on that. And so this is a going out of business strategy, but it's not a dumb strategy. This is the interesting thing, is they actually are reading the tea leaves of the future. And they think that if they lose the experience in front of the driver, they've already lost the engineering underneath the driver. General Motors and Ford and Mercedes and BMW and Toyota and Honda, every manufacturer in the world becomes a sheet metal company. They wrap the battery and motor, they wrap the user interface, they design whatever sheet metal around it, they're sticking their logo on it, they own all the go-to-market routes to market, they own the warranty, they own everything. They own all the risk, but very little of the profit of the economy around it isn't owned. And that's what happened in the PC industry. Almost every company over time went bankrupt. The number of companies that are still around, break even at the best of times selling PCs. There's not the value in the actual wrapping of other people's technology. It's not how ecosystems work in this case. Very important. And now let's finally play out the future. This is where things get fun. Looking ahead 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we know certain things are already in place. We know the world's going full electric. And governments and obviously inertia is already there. So we're already at the point where 10 million units were sold last year. The growth rate is at 55%. We see places like China, who's been the most aggressive, growing the quickest and having the biggest share of this. But we know, and I showed you the US and Europe and other places in Asia Pacific are all going this direction. And so this is already underway, and we're in that, again, 12 to 15 year window where this becomes a reality, that you won't be able to buy a gas powered car unless it's a specialty type of car or in a specialty type of location. The second thing is it goes self-driving. And you're watching this and it's had a lot of misstarts in terms of Tesla overpromising self-driving. Obviously, every time there's a self-driving accident, it gets on the front cover of the newspaper, kind of like an airline accident. It's very, very visible. But we already know in the hundreds of millions of miles that are being driven self-driving, it is at least 10x safer than humans. And we know in 18-wheelers, for example, the bigger trucks on the highway, the millions and millions of miles that they're driving is orders of magnitude safer than humans. So over time, we're watching, from a level 0, no self-driving capabilities to a level 5 where, some people like Tesla are promising that we're closer than we are. But looking somewhere in the middle at that, level 2, level 3, we are growing pretty quickly. 41% of cars last year had a level 2 capability. And as this gets better, and as this plays out over the next, again, 10, 15, 20 years, we move into L3, we move into L4, you start to have infrastructure built with its own dedicated lanes, with its own dedicated charging infrastructure, your own dedicated experience for self-driving. And that's where the world will actually start shifting very quickly. So this self-driving piece is second after the world goes electric. Third, we go into a new business model. So everyone from the maker of your toothbrush to the maker of your software, the maker of all the things you consume in the world, are trying to figure out how to get you to pay monthly. Subscription, consumption models, usage-based models, value-based models, all of these direct-to-consumer models, product-led growth models, they're all based around subscription. And in cars, it is probably more important than any other industry because we all buy something for a lot of money, right now 40 to 50 grand average price, that depreciates 99% of its time out on your driveway. We buy insurance for it that 99% of the time we're not using. We, obviously fuel it up with electricity or gas. We spend a lot of money and still on the side adjacent to the car in terms of keeping it running. So if you actually total up all your auto-related expenses per year, it makes up a major portion of many families' budgets. The fact of the matter is it's not optimized. Transportation, getting from point A to point B with the right experience, is actually what the end result or the outcome we're all looking for. And so this end result, by the way, is a model of transportation as a service. If I'm going to Home Depot, for anybody around the world, a big lumber yard, and I'm going to go buy some stuff to fix up my home, I want something, i.e. my ecosystem, in my case it might be my Apple, iPhone, or watch, knows I need to go do this, has already called ahead, and wherever I'm subscribing to transportation as a service is sending me a truck. In this case, it might be a Ford F-150 Lightning, shows up 5 minutes before I need it. It shows up as a pickup truck because that's what I'm going to do. If I happen to be going on a date with my wife, that pickup truck actually might turn into a 2-seater convertible. If I'm going to the airport, that vehicle that shows up will probably be a cube van with a lazy boy recliner inside, with all my technology. I can work, I can play, I can have all tinted windows so that when I get to the, that hour I spend going to the airport is productive, whether by play or by work. But every part of my transportation as a service is very hyper-personalized to exactly who I am, what I'm trying to do, and what outcome I'm pursuing. And today, I'm stuck with one of 365 kinds of cars that might work for Home Depot but not work for a date. Might work for going to the airport but not work for the fun factor. And that can all change if I subscribe to a service that gets me there. And this is kind of my last component, is all the partnering available. There's 4 groups of value in this future TaaS model. And the winners, the super winners, there's, not everybody's going out of business while we do this. We need to manufacture those cars, whichever shape they're in. We need obviously supply chain. We need distribution models. We need the technology to be able to do that. The question is, who takes the most value out of this industry, the most profit? And right now, you look at all these transportation as a service software vendors up in the upper left. Today, we do have Uber, we do have Lyft, we do have delivery services. We do have a lot of this infrastructure built on getting transportation as a service. but it's not that exact model of getting you to point A to point B in that perfect sense and being predictive in terms of how your life, is compared to someone next to you. We obviously have all the car manufacturers that have a stake in this. And there's a likelihood that I might subscribe to Ford in this case, because they give me the truck, they give me a Mustang, and they also build a whole line of cube vans. So Ford actually might be enough breadth and depth to serve my local needs. And, if you're someone else, it might be a Mercedes, it might be a Toyota, whatever it is. There's a handful of car companies here who have the capabilities of being that point of subscription or point of the consumption service. The local auto dealer is probably most in peril because self-driving cars will self-drive themselves, not to Main Street where the property is expensive and the services are expensive. They're going to drive themselves out to some warehouse by the airport to service themselves in most cases, and obviously, grab human attention at the cheapest possible way. So the sales model, the service model, and all of the stuff around the dealer in terms of value add is perilous in a case where I actually never buy a car anymore, and where I never service that car. It's actually owned somewhere else, and they service their own cars. So this idea is transportation as a service actually probably puts that one at most risk. And I think you know where the answer is going here. The company that owns the pixels, the company that owns the experience, the company that is the ecosystem around you delivering a better driving experience, right now looks to be one of the $1 trillion Googles and Apples. It's a high likelihood of social media companies, Meta and TikToks of the world. There's a high likelihood of Microsoft and others playing a very, very big role in this. Around the world, your Alibabas and others start to play a major, major role in now an industry that's been commoditized by the battery in the motor and by the user interface. And, anyone can stamp out sheet metal and bolt it together. So this is where the future of a $3 trillion industry and how fast it grows, and then who pulls out the benefits. You think about insurance now. It's not a consumer product anymore. It's a corporate product sitting behind these big companies. And these companies are big enough to self-insure. And you're thinking of all the financial services to give you a bank loan, to give you a car and put you on a lease. That kind of melts away. All the businesses that are attached outside of this industry start to change as well as this industry changes. So those are the 4 partnership stories which will radically revolutionize this industry. It's obviously taking place in all 27 industries at the same time, but we recognize these today. We recognize these moments. We recognize the things that are happening, and the future is actually not as hard to predict when you look at the tea leaves every day and see these growing charts and research that I showed you. And every company, and whether you're General Motors making a radical decision like that, or Ford, who's out there kind of threatening their dealers, kind of cutting off their right arm to save their left. These things aren't done by accident. And they recognize what a 10 or 20 year window looks like. And to be a winner in this space, it's going to be a very difficult time. So that's kind of my view on cars. That's my view on partnerships around cars. And I hope you have the great rest of your day.